And let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
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 Okay. Now yesterday we had our introduction to the course unit, and we began with some basic concepts in research. We looked at research philosophies and research approaches. Specifically, we looked at the positivist approach, which is quantitative in nature, and then the phenomenologist approach, which is qualitative in nature. Then we looked at the approaches, the deductive approach, which lends itself to the positivist philosophy. And then we looked at the inductive approach, which leans towards the phenomenologist philosophy. So clearly, these are two distinct approaches and philosophies. And briefly there, I had mentioned that there are usually arguments going back between the two. But as researchers, we really shouldn't have a bias one towards the other. What should guide us is what inquiry we are making, what kind of inquiry we are trying to make. There's also a possibility of combining the two. And yesterday I gave you just a brief guidance on when you would choose to combine the two. One, it is to help us triangulate our results, and two, to avoid the risks, the risks that we may find, especially in the positivist approach or deductive approach, because it depends on large quantities of data, which may disappear because it's normally just statistical figures which you input in a computer program, and your computer may crash. You also have the inductive approach, which has humongous amounts of data that one must analyze. So at a certain point, when you feel you have gotten enough, you've picked out enough themes from your inductive data, you can say, let me also use the statistical data to triangulate and also stop the process, the excessive process that comes into analyzing qualitative data. So today we want to start with strategies. Once you have selected your approach, what approach you wish to take. Now, again, one of the first things I want to state is that normally it's not explicit what philosophy we have, but we can indicate explicitly that my research is maybe largely qualitative or largely quantitative, or I'm combining the two. Most of the times you hear people say I'm using mixed methods. And of course, you give an explanation as to why, reasons as to why. And of course, these reasons always have to go back to your research problem and research question. Which approach is best to answer? Which approach is best? One of the things I've had over and over again is, what if I reach halfway and I realize I've made a mistake? That's the significance of having a supervisor. That is one. Two, it would also be very good if you created like groups amongst yourselves where you discuss. Research can be a very lonely process, very, very lonely. When you're seated in your room alone in the middle of the night, maybe 3 a.m. and you're stuck and the whole day you fail to do anything. And at 3 a.m. you're looking at everything and you're wondering, what have I gotten myself into? You can hit a crisis, but discussing with your supervisor, that's one. Discussing, if you created a group amongst you where you discuss, where you can present to one another what you've done so far, and let your colleagues critique your work, see areas where you might have missed. Maybe there's one person saw something the other one hasn't seen. When I was doing my research, that's one of the things I really appreciated when I was at the university where I graduated. We had a group and we would present to one another, and your colleagues would critique your work. Even the professors themselves would present papers they are publishing, and the students would critique. And it's a very good point to see loopholes and correct yourself. So research can be quite lonely. It's not something, yes, it's an individual work, but we don't see everything. It's not possible for us to see everything. So I would advise that you create those groups, have a close relationship with your supervisor. You can also find another lecturer apart from your supervisor to discuss with. Maybe somebody else may give you a viewpoint that your supervisor maybe may communicate something better than your supervisor. So have those groups. Now, just to continue with our concepts in research, within the research onion, we come to our third ring within the onion, the research strategies. We started with philosophies, research approaches. Now we're looking at the strategies. And the strategies primarily we are referring to the methods, what we refer to as the methods. Now, we have very many research methods. And again, the research method or methods you choose to use will depend on the research question you're trying to answer. It is not a must that you use only one method. You can combine several of them. You can use one, yes, or you can use two or three. That depends. But we have several of them, and we're going to go through them there. And also the other thing I want to point out is that new research methods also keep coming up. Yeah, new research methods keep coming up. For example, if you look at this research method, action design science, this is quite new. It was introduced in 2011. It's a combination of action research and design science. And it's also design science and action research are largely IS and ICT based. So these two methods are important for you to note, especially if you are looking at designing an artifact. That artifact may be a system, an application, or a framework, a model, as ICT students sometimes lean towards. So those two methods. But we shall look at all these other methods as well. Some methods you automatically look at and say, most likely I may never use this method. But let us see them. You never know. They may guide you somewhere. We are going to start with the experimental design. So experimental design is a largely quantitative method. And it is used mostly by people in the sciences, medical sciences use it, agriculture, and also ICT and IS. Actually, I found an article which I want to upload on Moodle, which was looking at finding out that the feelings that are produced by somebody using a smartphone application, the feelings of joy, of happiness, because they have used a smartphone application. I think no one can deny that when you're using a smartphone, it's not the same thing as a button phone. With a button phone, the only thing you're going to do is make a call, receive a call, or send a message or receive a message. That's it. But a smartphone really gives you, it's almost like a toy. Yeah? Yes, it can be used for office, but it's almost like a toy when you're somewhere and you amongst people and you don't really want to talk, you open up your phone, you go on WhatsApp, you check the news, you go to the social media sites, Instagram, so on and so forth. If you have a game, you play. So it's almost like a toy, and which means it must produce some kind of feeling out of it. And but I'll post up this article. It's from IS, from the IS field, and you look at it. Of course, some of the things that are there are things that we may not be able to get. For example, one of the pictures they show one of the test subjects, so respondents, is seated on a sofa, and there's a gadget looking at the brain waves in her head that is monitoring the brain waves and so on and so forth to monitor the feelings of happiness and joy. So some of those things we may not have them here in Uganda to carry out those tests, but we can have other kinds of test result of experimental lab tests. For example, you can test a system in the lab. That is one way. We can have a pre-test with a system. For example, let us say you've designed a system and the system has functionalities A, B, C, D, and you test them out as the designer. Then you can say, we want to see how the system will act within by different types of users, and you create two groups, a control group and an experimental group. So for example, your control group would be experts within a certain field. So let us say if it's an accounting system, you say, I'm going to give it to financial experts. Then the experimental group would be those who are not so experienced, who have limited financial background. And those ones, the financial group may recognize certain things, certain functionalities, and because of their financial background, will know what must go where, what kind of data needs to be fed here, what kind of data needs to be fed there. The experimental group may not and may input wrong data. So you want to see, after you've applied these two groups, what results do you get from your system? As an IS designer and a system designer, you're not a finance person. There are certain things you may neglect, but the control group may be able to tell you how the system behaves with a professional in that field. And the experimental group may be able to tell you how the system will behave if it is in the hands of a novice. So you'll be able to see the test results. Again, these control groups, the control groups and experimental groups, you select them depending on what kind of tests you're trying to do. Is it about functionality? It could also be about certain inputs like power. It could be things like maybe lower specification computers or devices being used. You can have different kinds of tests depending on what the results you want. So this is largely a quantitative kind of research, and the results it gives you are basically based on specific variables. So you would have a hypothesis, which would, based upon which you would carry out your test results. So the hypothesis, you'd either prove or disprove it. It could be on usability, usefulness, whatever it is. You'd have a hypothesis which would help you select your control groups and the variables that you're testing within the lab. We have any question so far?
Okay, I'm going.
No question?
Madam, for now, no.
Okay, let's move on then. The second is the survey. So this is another quantitative method. So when you're collecting this data, you're basically collecting, you'd have a questionnaire. Some questionnaires can be, let me also first note, some questionnaires can be qualitative in nature, and others may be quantitative in nature. However, I would advise that if you're using a survey, because normally if you're using a survey and you're collecting data from a large group of people, it would be advisable that you make it as quantitative as possible, because One, you may not be present as they fill out this questionnaire. And so you want to have a very easy questionnaire that can be quickly filled out. So the kind of data you'd have in your questionnaire should be quantifiable. Yeah, it should really be quantifiable. So when we're looking at the survey method, one, we're looking at somebody who really should first research and find out how to design that survey questionnaire that is going to pick quantifiable data that you can quantify. We have seen situations like that. Well, I'm sure all of us have encountered a survey before, where you may be asked a question and you're given a scale to rate your opinion of something. For example, you may rate something from strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. In between, you may have neutral. There may be a situation where you're given maybe I don't know, something like that. But also one of the things you must note also that sometimes on the scale, that question is irrelevant. But it depends. It should be something quantifiable, somebody's experience. So when you are collecting this data, you're picking it from a sample size, a sample size from a population, a sample size from a population. What do we mean? We have different types of, let's say, the general population of Uganda. If you ask the general population of Uganda, they would say we had 42 million. I think the last one I saw, we had 42 million or something like that. The last thing that was done by Uganda Bureau of Statistics. So that is a general population. That this population is also consists of subpopulation. For example, we have female and male. Yes, Robert, you have a question?
Thank you, Doctor. My question is, is there a situation whereby you just find yourself using a certain method, or you have to choose it from the onset?
Now, that's a good question, Robert. Do you find yourself using a certain method, or you choose it from the onset? Everything starts from selecting appropriate research problem and research question. That is the first thing. That would be your first guiding factor. What is my research area, and what is my research question? When you look at your research question and you've narrowed down on it, and you have determined together with your supervisor and discussions with others that this is a good research question. It is researchable and I can find the information. Then the next question is, what method, what approach would be the best to answer it? What method would be the best to answer it? Now, when we come to research problems and research questions, we shall actually see which type of research questions which point to a qualitative side and which type point to a quantitative side. All of these guide you, and with time, you will actually see it. Now, there are some things which are automatic. For example, if there's somebody who wants to do with something with designing an artifact, for example, a system, selecting a system, designing and implementing a system, most likely then that person would go for design science, action design science, or action research. Automatically, that's where that situation goes. And automatically then that person knows I'm also going to use a case study strategy, because you're going to have to implement that somewhere, yeah, in a specific context. So automatically, if a person knows my research question or objective involves any of these things, designing and implementing, then you automatically know you may have to use design science or action design science or action research, like we saw in one of the articles that we were presented with. We also know that you automatically have a case study approach. Now, within there, you may choose to say, okay, how do I want to really go in depth to see people's experience? Am I going to lean most to qualitative side? Then I'll say, okay, maybe I'll use focus group discussions. Maybe it's easier if I have a small group of people. And then I may also have one-on-one interviews. I may observe something. It really depends. And also in design, one might say, I'm going to use the design science, but I'm also going to I'm looking maybe at functionality. And then I say, I'm going to use design science together with experimental, the experimental method, the lab experiment method. So that person automatically, their question, what they're dealing with, helps them to select. So, Robert, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, doctor, you've answered it.
Yeah. Now, even within within them, you can also say, I'm also going to have a questionnaire to triangulate. And as you use a questionnaire, whereas your research may not be quantitative in nature, you will design this questionnaire in a quantitative manner, and you will look at you also use all of these. So you may say, it's going to be largely qualitative. I'm going to have a focus group discussion, interviews, but at the end, I also want to triangulate by giving out a questionnaire from my users. So because of course your sample size there would be very small if let's say it's within an organization, but your objective there is not to relate it to the general population, but to help you answer your question, that the variables you found in the qualitative side, you triangulate them to the survey side. So you don't necessarily generalize your findings to the rest of Uganda, let's say for that matter, but you're simply using the survey within your small case study area. Have I answered, Robert, and any other person who may have had a similar question?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So if your research is going to follow a quantitative nature, one of the first things we look at is sample size. So as before I went to Robert's question, I was talking about a population. Yeah. So in Uganda, we have our population, 42 million, but that population is made up of subpopulations. For example, we have a certain number of males and a certain number of females. We also have a certain number of urban population, and then we have a rural population. We also have literacy levels. We have a certain number of population that has limited or no literacy level. Then we have the population which is literate. We also have the elite, those who would say are graduates and so on, and so have some kind of formal degree qualification. We have the middle class, we have the upper class, we have lower, all those. We have the peasant community and so on and so forth. We all have all of these. Now, depending on what your research is dealing with, you will have a sample size. So let me give an example. You may be doing your research in the field of IS, and maybe you're dealing with something to do with system applications, a particular system which is predominantly used in the banking industry. Now, if that system is used in all banking industry and you're researching on that particular system using a survey, then you may need to find out the population of banks in Uganda. What is the population of banks? And within that population, how many users of that system exist within each bank, the total population. Now for you, if you're going to carry out a quantitative study on that particular system using a survey, then you may need to find out that population, and then you calculate, there are predetermined formulas for that. You calculate the sample size that would be representative of that population. of that particular population. Let's say all the banks, let's say the commercial banks in Uganda that use that system, and the particular users of that system. Yeah. Let us imagine not every user uses a particular system. For example, the receptionist may not use it. Tony, you have a question.
Yeah, Doctor, before you go on,
Yes.
I think this is something I know we would have covered some time back, but I just wanted to draw it back.
Yeah.
So I'm seated, listening to you this morning, I'm seated here thinking, is it okay for an IS student actually just focus on the research and recommendation of what can be improved without necessarily going into systems and what?
Okay. Now, there is what research is, and if you go to IS journals, you'll find people are doing a variety of research, like what you're asking, where somebody can decide to say, rather than actually design and implement a system, let me go and do something like this on maybe adoption of a system and so on and so forth. That is 100% acceptable in IS research. Now, let me also state, however, in UMU, there are different opinions. And unfortunately, these different opinions can derail, or rather, can stifle that kind of research. But however, in reality, if you're looking at proper research, it is 100% possible for an IS student to say, I'm going to look at implementation and do something like the example that I'm giving you. It's 100% acceptable and allowed in IS research. One of the big mistakes we make is to not have a proper definition, or to show that demarcation between IS and computer science. Yes, you've seen different degrees in the field of ICT. We have those who are doing computer science, we have those who are doing IT, we have those doing IS, we have those who are, for example, we have among us those who are doing ICT architecture and design. These are all different fields. They're actually quite distinct. Computer science is not the same as IS. What is computer science? Computer science is the science behind IT. So here, this is when you find people who are doing things like the Turing machine, the mathematics behind computers, and the theories behind computers, and so on and so forth. Now, people in that kind of field would be the ones who automatically you find are coming up, let's say, with new programming languages or new Turing machines and so on and so forth. But when we come to IT and IS, what you find is that you now find the computer coming into a context. Okay? The devices that are a result of computer science, and now the artifacts from computer science are now coming into a context. So you find people who are designing systems, let's say using new programming languages that have come out of computer science, new algorithms that have come out of computer science. They are using them and designing applications which are going to sit in a context. Now, once you're coming up, that if you're looking at that field, that means you're looking at the design process, you're looking at the implementation and adoption process. All of that is a researchable area. But unfortunately, when we're now talking about research, not everyone is a researcher, and sometimes the focus may be on design application. We want to see your programming skills and so on and so forth, which can be quite misleading. So one, I wouldn't want to set the class on a collision course with the whole department. That would not be my interest. What I would advise you to do is also be smart. You want to do your research, but be smart about it. Somebody wants to see a system. Show them the system, but go ahead and also do your research. Ensure that you have a system that you show, but you focus on your research question. That yes, when you sit on a panel and they want to see a system, show them the system, but insist on your research question. That would be the advice I would give you. Like I spoke earlier to one person who asked that question. And I said, if somebody wants the system, you give it to them. Ask somebody else to design it for you. Yeah, ask somebody else to design it for you. Just make sure you understand its workings and a bit of the programming behind it, but you focus on your research. That's what I would advise. For me personally, I wouldn't mind supervising somebody who hasn't a system to show, because I'm not interested in your programming skills. I'm interested in your research skills. For me, that's what I would say. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to put you in a collision course. What I would advise is show the supervisors, show them the system they want to see, but focus on your research question. I don't know, Tony, if I've answered your question.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a bit of a politically charged situation there in the department, but yeah, you can try to also politically maneuver through it. Okay. Now back to this. I hope you've understand the concept of samples and populations, what we mean. I hope
Excuse me, doctor.
Pardon?
Yes, you do. Excuse me, doctor.
Mm-hmm. So within that survey.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yes, please.
Now going back to that very question, the one you have just answered about systems and then also the research.
Yes.
Like I myself, I'm not a systems designer or developer. And even if the department insisted, that means I'll get somebody to do it for me. So my interests are different. Is there a way the department, I know maybe this is off the topic, but is there a way the department can work it out to see that people who are not systems developers also conduct their research and maybe present areas where they are most comfortable
with? Now, this is what I would suggest. This is what I would suggest to you. There's usually a research workshop. I would suggest that insist and put these points forward. Insist and put these points forward that some of us are not systems developers. That is not our focus. And this is what we would like to do. I would suggest insist and put it forward. I don't think that can be ignored. There are quite a number of us. There are few, so far I know we have 2 PhD holders full-time in the department. And those can come up and defend your point of view. So for me, I would suggest to you is put it forward when we have that research workshop, that there are those of us who are not interested in designing systems. Yeah, put it forward. And I don't think that would be ignored at any point.
Thank you, Doctor.
Welcome. And I remember one, even for the ICT students, one of the things that I noted with ICT, there's always this thing of design a framework, design a framework, design a framework. You realize over time, it becomes monotonous and you don't see the point of it. And you ask yourself, where is the research in this? If you have done your work well, no one will question you. I'll give you an example. There's a student I supervised, and this was even before I got my PhD. And I not yet, I was on my way to defending. And when we were carrying out the research, I told him, look, you don't have to design a framework, don't have to do this. And then he came up and told me that I think one person who may be interested in this, I don't remember who is it that is doing is working with mHealth. Yeah, Emmanuel. Yes, Emmanuel. Now this one was interesting. This gentleman, he's right now working with UNICEF New York. So they were applying a community-based mobile application, and what he did was there was a framework that had been developed in South Africa for a community-based application, mobile application, and what he did was to use that framework to validate it. So his objective was to validate it. Why? This framework had been developed from one context in South Africa. Now, South Africa is not the same as Uganda. So the objective was to see if the application will be adopted and sustainable. So he got that framework and used it to find out if the same variables that they found in South Africa were also here. And that was the objective of his research. He was just to validate a framework. And when I remember when we talked about it, I said, I know there are going to be issues, but let's stick to this because this is pure research. And I remember when he presented it, I remember one of the lecturers saying that, don't you think you should publish your work? They were really impressed. If you're truly focused on true research and you demonstrate you're bringing what we call state-of-the-art research, that means you're bringing the latest research in a certain field. Nobody is going to dispute what you're doing. Nobody. So I would suggest also be bold and sincere with what you're bringing forward. And I don't think you'll have a challenge. Okay, back to the survey method. Now, once you have selected your sample size from your target population, now what you're basically saying is that this sample size is representative of the population that I'm targeting. I gave you the example of, let's just say you're an IS student, IS researcher, and you're looking at a particular system that is used by, let's say, all commercial banks, or a certain types of system, a certain category of system. And you're trying to find out something about them, maybe its usability or its adoption, or it is issues of security, whatever it is. You then, whatever it is you're researching about, you'd have identified, depending what your research question is, you would have identified your variables. Let us say it is on security. And you also are trying to look at the correlationship, the correlationships between those variables and the causations. What are the predicted causes? So those would be part of your questionnaire. You'd be seeking these answers from the questionnaire. So you'd find your questionnaire is designed based on these three elements: the variables you're looking for, maybe it's security, maybe it's usability, whatever it is, the relationships between those variables, and what the causes of those variables. So even for the ICT students, maybe your research is on policy and security. You can also design something based on that, policy and security. Maybe you're trying to find out issues of policy and security within banks or within universities, high institutions of learning, whatever it is. You can also design a survey questionnaire based on these elements. Have we had any question from ICT? From the ICT side, and maybe my examples are more focused on IS, and you may be lost somewhere there.
Yes, Doctor. I'm from ICT.
Yes, please. So
I was saying I had my questions and I'm from ICT.
Okay.
I don't know what other members from ICT are thinking about.
ICT, our ICT colleagues. Can we relate anything of what we're talking about to these, let's say, these methods or these research approaches?
Yes, Doctor, we are following. I am personally following.
Pardon?
I am personally following, and I think the rest are also following. Where questions come up, I'll be able to put them up.
Okay, thank you. So as we had stated earlier, the survey is usually a quantitative method and leans towards the deductive approach. So that's where you see you would have a hypothesis. Your questionnaire would be designed based on your hypothesis. So the hypothesis, you essentially, you should be seeing the variables that your hypotheses have outlined. This should be quite visible within your questionnaire. Now, the survey is one of the most economical and methods that we have. It's one of the most economical, and it takes a very limited amount of time to administer. The areas that are key, however, with the questionnaire are the design part. The design of a questionnaire is extremely important. Why? You don't want to pick erroneous data. You don't want to pick data that is useless. You don't want to pick data that will give you the wrong information. So the design process is extremely important. One of the key points that I have learned over time, especially in my first class, the class I had previously, we had one student who was called Crippen, who was very good with quantitative research and specifically with questionnaires. One of the things he pointed out is that when you're designing your questionnaire, number one, it should be pointing to your hypothesis. So the variables that you're trying to pick out from your hypothesis should be visible within your research, within your questionnaire. So you should be trying to measure. You're trying to measure your variables to find out if they exist and what causes do they have. The relationships that a certain theory has told you may cause. Remember, we had said that when we are using the deductive approach or the positivist approach, we are coming from a theory. So the theory is proposing certain hypotheses. So this hypothesis is something that you want to go out and test. So I gave you the example of term which says a system will be adopted if it is perceived easy to use, and it will be adopted if it is perceived to be usable. There's also something else term proposes. Term proposes that women will adopt a system if they perceive it easy to use, and men will adopt it if they perceive it to be useful. So those are hypotheses that is a hypothesis you can come out and test. And there are many other theories in IS and ICT, which you can go out and test. Yeah. So your questionnaire must be designed based on that. Two, you don't want to have a questionnaire that is that has errors in it. So when we come to the design approach, designing research design, we shall talk about issues of validation, how we can validate our tools. So we also have the different tools that we can use to validate on the quantitative side, on the qualitative side. So the design part, this is when we consider things like validation. And these are extremely important. As much as the survey is quite economical and it can be, you can administer your questionnaire, let's say within a month, you receive back your results. If it has been designed badly, that whole process may be considered null and void, especially if you ask the wrong question to the wrong group of people using the wrong variables. So the design part really must take, you must take time with it. Once you've designed your questionnaire, before you administer it to your sample size, you pilot your questionnaire. These things are extremely important. There are many times you see a student wanting to administer their questionnaire before they pilot it. To pilot it is basically to test it. After you've taken it through the design process, you've validated it, you've given it to an expert to look at it, your supervisor, or there may be an expert in a certain field. And they have pointed out areas where you may want to change. You pilot it. That means your sample size, you give it to a small group of people, and you ask them to fill it out and then give you feedback. And in that process, you may find there's a question which is ambiguous or vague. There's a question which may be useless, and you may take it out or redesign it, rephrase it. So the pilot process is also another extremely important part. So these processes are extremely important for you to go through. And when you're reporting back, as you're writing out your thesis or dissertation, you actually talk about the validation and piloting stages you went through and the things that you changed. So this basically, when you point this out in your research, you're validating your research, you're giving it values. You're saying that you've taken all the due processes to ensure that you've actually you've gone through the scientific process. Sometimes your questionnaire can also involve structured observation. That is, you can design your questionnaire to have a little bit of a qualitative side if you see that it's needed. So you may have an open-ended question in there that can allow a respondent to give maybe more about what they feel about something. If you so wish that it has it, if you feel that it is necessary. So the questionnaire may not always be purely quantitative. You may also have some questions which allow the respondent to talk about their feelings. However, also I would like to say, minimize this as much as possible, because like I said, a questionnaire is not something people want to fill out. When somebody perceives this questionnaire is going to take too much of my time, they may ignore it. You remember yesterday I gave you the example of one of the PhD candidates that I was seated with, who sent out a questionnaire by email, and she received back, the response rate was really low, and she was frustrated. She was saying, I've sent out emails, I've called, I don't know what to do. So you don't want that situation. You really want to have the highest rate of response. Let's say if you've sent out 100 questionnaires, let's have 95% received, 95 respondents back, or 90 or 80 even at least, so that you can you are able to make a conclusion on your findings. Do we have any questions so far on surveys?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So let's say we find ourselves in a scenario where, say, my research area is quite sensitive and I can only work with around 10 people. Would that still be feasible?
If the smaller the number, the more qualitative it becomes. Then in that situation, I would advise, especially if it is sensitive, you have, let's say, something like focus group discussions, where you really go deep. You go as deep as possible. And when you're seeing quantitative research is wide. You're going as wide as possible. I gave you the example of, let us say, in IS or ICT, let us say you are looking at the issue of policy and security. Two things, policy and security, how the two are related, how, if there's a correlation between them, and the researcher says you're looking at policy and security in commercial banks, or cyber security specifically for that matter. Even if it's on the IS side, you want to look at where it has been implemented within a particular system or certain types of systems where the cyber security part is extremely important. Then you might say, I'm going out, I will send a questionnaire out to this number of banks. We have the total number of commercial banks in Uganda is this, and you have the statistical number. And then you say, to be representative, I will ask this number of banks. And within this number of banks, these are the people, the key people, that this is the population that is really focused on that. And you say, I'm going to send out a questionnaire to these people. These are a number of people, and this is the population, and I'm going to send it out to this number. There you're going wide. Yeah? You're going as wide as possible. Now, depending on the questions you want to ask, some things may be, those respondents can give you via the questionnaire. They can wholeheartedly admit, or for example, if you're asking things like, do you have a policy? Yes, a policy on security. What did you consider this or that? What is the effect of this on this? That may be surface data that you can get, and that may answer your question. But if you want to go even more sensitive, and you may want to even hide the identity of the bank, let us say, then in that situation, you may want to focus on, let it be qualitative research, and that research must be very secretive to the point that you're not willing to reveal the bank, you're not willing to reveal the respondents, the identity of the respondents. Let me give you another example from another field. So I had earlier mentioned I do some work with Palliative Care Association, and sometimes I'm involved in research with them that is not necessarily ICT related, by virtue of the fact that I'm a researcher. So at a certain point we discussed, we have been discussing the possibility of doing research on palliative care with a very vulnerable group, that is the people who suffer from drug and alcohol abuse. So now, one, you realize that's a very sensitive group. You don't necessarily, somebody who has been heavily abusing drugs, you don't necessarily want to reveal their identity. I remember when social media was reporting on the unfortunate situation of a musician, Jackie Chanduru. I think she's called Chanduru or something like that. I may be mispronouncing her name. There was a report about her where I think her manager made a video of her and showing her how her state and how she lacked some very, very basic but very sensitive things. And I remember people got up and said, this is really bad. Somebody is in a very vulnerable situation. Even if you're trying to seek for financial support, it shouldn't be in this way. And I remember I read a report, she came out afterwards, she's trying to come back, and she said that she found she couldn't recover in Uganda because her situation had been made public, and she had been ridiculed, and she felt she was being judged, and she said she ended up going to Nairobi for treatment, where she felt she was not being put out there. So you realize that the area of drug and alcohol abuse is a very sensitive area, very, very sensitive, and you don't want to necessarily reveal that kind of information. So I remember when we had started, I said, let me try and go out and let me read papers, research articles on it. And the simple thing of hiding the identity of the respondent is extremely important, where you can use another name, you can use a pseudonymous name, you can use change their location, so that at any point, if somebody is reading about the person's experience, because the respondent is telling you their experience. One person I remember said, I've had so many family members, I've alienated myself from so many people. So you don't want to reveal who this person is, because if you want to reveal it, then you know, oh, this person comes from this family. Oh, this person is no longer talking to his wife. His children are no longer talking to him, you know, things like that. So in a situation like that, Esa, what I would advise is then go qualitative and hide the identity of the people. So let us say if it is let us say an example of security in a bank, cyber security, and you want to go deep to really see what is being done in a particular bank. Now, the bank may not want to reveal its security measures, that particular bank, but it's going to be published. So what you would do is you'd hide the identity of the bank, you'd hide the identity of the respondents. Yeah? So that it becomes extremely secretive. You're getting the information you want, but you're not revealing the bank, the people, and so on and so forth. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to look at research questions that may be appropriate for a survey. If you are looking at a research question that is looking at behavior, yes? So behavior is something that people may quickly reveal. Maybe the behavior of a bank in terms of security, in terms of its policy, in terms of maybe the hierarchy of what is revealed to who and so on and so forth. That may be easily given out. Attitudes, beliefs, and opinions. So this one can be revealed in a questionnaire. Yes. Remember yesterday I gave you the example of maybe the difference between an academic user and a commercial user. Those are two different situations, because these are different and their objectives are different in nature. You may have differing opinions. There was a time we were doing, when I was head ICT, UMU, and there was a time somebody came, somebody was critiquing our ICT structure. And specifically, one of the things they critiqued was that UMU had no filters. So UMU was opening up, you can basically access any site while you're at UMU. And one of the things they pointed out is that people could even access pornography. And if they're accessing pornography, that means one, it's chewing up, it's taking up bandwidth, and then of course there were the ethical issues. So they put it to us as ICT that we didn't have filters and so on and so forth. So we went ahead and responded, myself together with my then system administrator. And we said, one, we said, one, this is an academic institution. I remember one of the things they said that we needed to stop, to block the torrents, so that students could stop downloading movies. This was taking up a lot of bandwidth. Then we said, okay, we can't block them. They're not open because we don't know how to block them. We know how to block them. But we said, if we do that, then we're also going to block YouTube. Now, where's the challenge in that? I'm recording this session. After I record it, I'm going to pass it on to the ICT department. The ICT department will upload it on YouTube and then send me the link, and then I'll put the link up for you on Moodle. Already you see there's a resource on YouTube. You yourselves, I'm sure, have used YouTube for many things, yeah, in your work. I remember my niece was doing she did her bachelor's in IT at UMU. And I remember Brian Muchake, one of the lecturers in ICT in the department gave them as a class an assignment to do with Photoshop. He didn't teach them. He asked them to do something with Photoshop, but he didn't show them how to do it. And I remember they used YouTube was a huge resource. So the system administrator said that, okay, if I block these videos, I'm also going to block YouTube. And you already know YouTube is a resource. Then he said on the issue of pornography, yes, it is true. We can also block them. And I remember at one time, before I was head ICT UMU, there was a time when the ICT department did block. And I remember at the time, if you try to access a pornographic site, sorry about that. If you try to access a pornographic site, what would happen was there was a yellow page that would appear on your browser, in your browser, with the bishop holding a crucifix, and the bishop would, and they would say, UMU does not support porn. So it would be really embarrassing. Imagine if you are a student in the lab and that thing comes up. But also the unfortunate bit was that because you were putting in certain keywords, the filters use certain keywords, even sometimes a legitimate site would be blocked by these filters. They would be blocked by these filters, and once they are blocked, then let us give an example. There was a visiting lecturer from the US. She was trying to access a healthcare website, and the system blocked her, saying that this was a pornographic site. And I remember she sent an email frustrated saying, I'm trying to access a legitimate site for purposes of research, but this software is blocking. And I remember after that, a debate came out. And then that was one of the reasons when I was head ICT, I think it should be still there now, where we said, no, we're not blocking anything. We said, what if this is an academic institution where one of the primary things is research? What if there is somebody who is doing research on pornography and you have blocked them? What if there is a point where there's some research on pornography? What happens? So in other words, in an institution of higher learning, like for example, UMU is supposed, not that it is supposed, it is Catholic founded. So it is basically a Christian university. And in our adolescence, you'd say, yes, the first thing we should do is block these pornographic sites. For sure we would. But once you start blocking in an institution of higher learning, which is focused on research, then you're blocking something. You're curtailing something. Now, like for instance, that lady who was doing research in healthcare, but the software automatically saw that as what would I say? As pornographic. So now a survey, for example, a survey on how this would affect certain things on policy, on let's say on viewing pornography. What would be people's attitudes, beliefs, and opinions? This would be also a good idea to see, let's say in IS, in ICT, policy in terms of policy formulation, where certain attitudes, beliefs, and opinions may be overturned because of maybe the culture of the organization and things like that. If you're looking for characteristics, let's say you're looking for characteristics of a policy structure within certain types of organizations, characteristics that may affect enterprise architecture, or characteristics that may affect design and implementation of systems. Now, take note that there are things that overlap in IS and in ICT. In ICT, you have a module that is looking at design and implementation. This can also come into IS as well. So these are things that are common, and they can be done by both sides. Expectations are another one, self-classification, knowledge. So if you're looking at these kinds, if you have research questions that are looking at any of these, behavior, attitude, characteristics, expectations, self-classification, knowledge, these are very much surface knowledge or surface data. So these you can use a survey. We come to the third research strategy, which is case study. Now, case study is one of the most popular research methods that I've seen. Predominantly, it's used, especially at master's level when you're dealing with design. Case study is one of the most popular if you're dealing with design and implementation. This is the most popular. It's usually quite qualitative in nature. You have a system, you want to implement it and see its behavior, case study approach. If you want to see the opinions of people or the experience of people on a particular system or a particular artifact, case study approach is possible. There also is, and let me see if it's on the next slide now. You can also have a multiple case study approach. What do I mean? There are systems that can be implemented, for example, in more than one place, more than one case situation. Look at the situation of Moodle. Moodle is now being used in universities, but Moodle can also be used in a secondary school. Moodle can also be used in organizations which are focused on training, the training element. Moodle can also be used. So you can have, let us say, a multiple case study approach. Let's say you're studying a particular system and you want to see its behavior in different contexts. Then you can have two or more case studies where you study this particular phenomena. It could be the phenomena of ICT policy. It could be the phenomena of ICT management. It could be the phenomena of enterprise architecture. Whatever it is, you look at it from a multiple case study approach, and you look at the different variables that exist in the different cases. I gave you the example yesterday of a system implemented within an academic setting and then also within a corporate setting. The behavior of the users is completely different. Yeah, behavior of users is completely different. If, for example, now if I just give you an example from an ICT perspective, when I saw in UMU, when the Zivasti system was implemented, the behavior of the finance department was very different from the behavior of the academic. The behavior of the administrator was quite different from the behavior of the ICT department, because these are different users and they approach a system in different ways. Yeah, so the users have different objectives. They have different motivating factors. Yeah, so it would be interesting for one to do a study on system implementation and the different users and what is it that motivates the different users. Okay, so you may find somebody will say, I'm going to use term theory to look at the different users and what is it that motivates them. And I introduce maybe a qualitative approach, a qualitative element in a survey questionnaire, or I'm going to use focus group discussions. I'm going to add that element using multiple case study approach. Yeah, so that the advantage with using the case study approach, it helps you to focus on understanding the dynamics present within a single setting. So I gave you the example of academic users versus corporate users. Then you also have situations where you may say, I'm going to look at academic users, but from different settings. A public university is not the same as a private university. So you may understand that dynamics in a public university are not the same as those in a private university. So it would be interesting to see the different users from the different dynamics, so to speak. Case studies are used when we are at an exploratory stage. So that is largely qualitative. We explore. We explain something in quantitative, but we explore something in a qualitative side. So we see case study is really leaning towards the inductive approach and the phenomenologist or approach. So the case study can be a single, looking at an individual person, a single institution, organization, a small group or a community, a nation, a decision, a policy, any of these. Now, it would be interesting when somebody says, looking at an individual person, someone may say, how can you do research on an individual person? I actually saw an example of that. One time I went for a research workshop. It involved a number of people from Africa. So there was a particular lady from Tanzania, and she was doing qualitative research in gender. Yes. And specifically, she was looking at the dynamics of interracial relationships. So she looked at one couple in Tanzania, specifically, of course, she was looking at the gender side, she was looking at the female side. So she followed a woman who was married, a white lady who was married to a Tanzanian celebrity. That was back, I think it was in 2007 or something like that. And she told us that she spent a whole year with this lady. And because it was qualitative research, she said she really spent time with this lady. She would go to the doctor's appointments with her. She would go with her to her children's school. She would go shopping with her. So in that whole time, she was trying to understand the dynamics of that relationship, an interracial relationship. A woman who has left her country, she's now in a different country, a different culture. How is she coping? Eh? You know, gender studies really focus, if you're looking at gender studies, they really look at so many things. Where is the support system? How does culture affect you? Your upbringing? Maybe you are looked at as a second-class citizen in a home. Now you are here, you are in a different country, different culture. What is the feeling for you now as a wife, as a mother, and so on and so forth. So that was a particular research that was looking at one person. Ashaba, you have a question? Ashaba, do you have a question? Okay, no. Okay, so this is essentially the case study approach. So you could be looking at any particular thing, but you're essentially going in to explore, to understand the dynamics of a particular context. Even, I gave you the example of a student who I supervised, and there was a framework that had been developed from a research done in South Africa, and he said, now, South Africa and Uganda are two different contexts. So let me really try and see if the dynamics exist in Uganda, and see if I can validate this framework, that it can be used in other developing contexts which are dealing with a community healthcare-based mobile system. And he did that because that was a different context. So that validates your research. The community here becomes a different community, a different setting altogether. You can't have even something as differing as in the same nation but a separate community. What do I mean? For Emmanuel, he can agree with me on this. If I'm implementing a system with VHTs, that is a village health team, the behavior of that dynamic of that community is quite different if I'm implementing it with trained healthcare workers who are also in a rural community. Not so, Emmanuel?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because the VHTs are basically ordinary rural community members. Yeah, for example, I'll give an example. You might find the former school teacher in a primary school in a rural area is part of the VHTs. A mother, a simple mother, a home who runs a home and maybe is a farmer is also a part of the VHT members. Someone who owns a small shop is part of the VHT members. And now this particular group is quite different from trained healthcare workers who may also be in the rural area, yeah? Medically trained healthcare workers. So if you give them the same application, the same mobile application or system, their dynamics are quite different. Their literacy levels are different. The ICT literacy levels are quite different. The resources available to them, for example, to charge a phone, are quite different. The types of phones they have available to them are quite different. We find that this VHT is using a feature phone buttons, whereas the healthcare worker has access to a mobile application. Sorry, a smartphone. So again, the dynamics are quite different.
Excuse me, madam.
Yes, please.
So now that you've opened up the talk about dynamics.
Yes.
The previous example you gave, I'm not entirely comfortable with it because I feel okay. You gave an example of one woman, like a white woman married to a celebrity.
Yes.
In Tanzania. But I don't know, what was she trying to achieve? Was she trying to speak for all the foreign ladies who get married like in Africa, or you're just making research about this one person? Because I feel it cannot give you the conclusive answers you're looking for.
Yeah.
Given,
yes.
I mean, the circumstances are different. This guy is a celebrity. Probably he has all the money that he wants. We want to see how the economic part of it also comes in to influence different things. So I wouldn't use that as a typical example, because I feel it's lacking. Yeah, you go qualitative on that, but I feel you don't get exactly what you want.
Okay, Emmanuel, that's a very good question. Very, very good question. And I hope others are really paying attention to this. We say that normally the case study approach is used when we are exploring, when we are at the exploratory stage. What do we mean that we are at an exploratory stage? We don't know. We want to find out. We don't understand the dynamics that exist. Yeah, we don't understand the dynamics that exist in a particular situation. Now, I'll give you an example of the research I was doing. I did my research in India, which is in Nkosi, PG district. Now, when I was there, my research was largely exploratory. What I was basically saying is that we implement mHealth applications in rural contexts, but we don't really know what dynamics exists. What works, what doesn't work. What is of value, what is not of value. Yeah. Specifically, what was guiding me, I was looking at sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we are talking about value chains. What do I mean? We have the mobile money application in Uganda and also in majority of African countries. Now, interestingly, mobile money only exists in Africa. I'm not sure, maybe it could be in other developing countries, but primarily it's developed and is and exist primarily in Africa. Why? Because Africa has a large part of the population that is unbanked. So there is a certain value mobile money offers to the African continent that it doesn't offer to other continents. There's a value chain. And when we talk about value chains, we're talking about business models. So a business model tells you what is of value. And because if it is of economic value, it will be sustained because there will always be clients for something. Just give you a simple example. Sorry, apologies to Shaban. I notice you're there, but apologies to you. We have a market for pigs in Uganda. Yeah, here in the village here, my sisters and I started a pig project, and because we've started it, we've not sold any. I was really worried. I was saying we need to look for the market, and we found an abattoir in Kampala, and the first thing he told me, he said, "You don't need to worry. The market is there." So what does that mean? That there is a business model, there is an actual value chain. So now when we talk about sustainability in a field of mHealth, we are saying what is of value? What is of value to the people who will use this mHealth application? That once the donor pulls out, this thing is going to continue. And what my research at that time was basically saying, we don't understand the dynamics. So we are going out to explore. So in other words, Emmanuel, my research was not saying we can now relate this to the rest of the world. No, I was going out to explore, and I picked out certain variables. Now, somebody else, for example, you, Emmanuel, you could say, let me find out from this research if this exists elsewhere apart from India. If the same dynamics exist, you may find some exist, some do not, and you report that. And then someone says, oh, this exists somewhere. There was first research done in India. Maybe this research is going to be done in Arua. Are the same dynamics there? Then another person will say, let me do the same thing in Kabale. Then we find there are certain commonalities. Those dynamics we've all pointed out that are common, then become part, or we can now start to formulate a theory. Okay? We begin to formulate a theory. And that theory, somebody can come out with a hypothesis. And then somebody else can say, let me do a quantitative study to find out if this is really true. Emmanuel, I don't know if I'm making sense.
Okay, I hear you, but
yes.
I think my confusion was I didn't get the entire context on the case study. So here you're just trying to explore. You don't know what's up. You don't know what you'll expect, but you're trying to go in there. You're just trying to do a deep dive to come up with things that will later inform other decisions, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it, Emmanuel. So you see now the difference between the quantitative approach and the qualitative approach. The qualitative approach really comes in to explore the beginnings of something. Yeah.
Right.
And from the more research is done with it, then and things are validated and they are found to exist elsewhere in other contexts, then you come up with a theory. You begin to formulate the theory. Tony, you have a question.
No, Doctor, it's not just a question. I just seek to understand if what I'm getting, I can relate it to my everyday life. So what I'm getting from exploratory kind of study is I'm here comparing it to how you do quality improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And you first have a model, probably project at one place,
mm-hmm.
and then try to study the negatives and then the pros and cons of what comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Get a deep diving of it, and then after it has turned successful, then you can scale it up onto the other different locations that you want to. that is how I was relating to this. I don't know how that is exactly what you're saying.
You start, okay, sorry. Let's just repeat for me again.
Yeah, so I was just relating this this exploratory kind of case study to some of the quality improvement measures that you take, where you have probably, let's say we are implementing, we want to see the impact of water consumption in a community. And then we say that we are not going to scale it up in the entire Masaka region. We are going to start with Nondwe, and we do a study. We put water measures there, quality improvement water measures there, and we observe over time how people adapt to them, how people keep them, and how they change lives. Now, if the impact is positive, probably now you can go ahead and scale it up to probably Rakai, Liantonde,
yes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, something like that. And then you may also want to observe, do you see the same dynamics in Rakai? Do you see the same dynamics here? You know, things like that. Eh?
Yeah.
So what I get from all this is that, of course, the case study kind or the qualitative kind of research is basically taking a stroll into the unknown to come up with things. Okay.
Yes, yeah. The thing is, so we see now where the qualitative approach and quantitative approach begin, where they differ. They begin to differ, especially in the methods that we use. This is, I think, the fourth. We have seen experimental, survey, case study, then we look at grounded theory. Now, grounded theory is a research method most of you may not use. Yeah, you may not use it per se. It is a research that usually attempts to develop theory. It is usually used to develop theory, and it is sort of like the very first beginning. So usually it's the kind of research which has no theoretical framework whatsoever. Now, what do I mean by this? All the research you're going to do, whether you're going to do survey, whether you're doing experimental or case study, there is a certain theory that guides you. A certain theory, whether you're exploring something for the first time, there's a theory that guides you. There are certain theories or a theoretical framework that guides you. What do I mean? We gave the example of survey. A survey, we can say, where we want to use term. Yeah, we want to use term or any other theories that exist. Term is one which just comes off my head immediately. There are other theories that may guide us. And you want to check for certain variables using a survey. Same thing with the experimental design research. Let me even be more specific and give you the example of my research, which used case study, ethnography, and action design research. I was basically exploring, but I had a theoretical framework that was guiding me. I gave a hint to it in the previous example, which I was giving to Emmanuel, where I said I was doing research on a community to find out what works, what does not work, what is of value, especially for an mHealth application that was being implemented in a rural area. What is of value to a rural community? What is of healthcare value? Now, immediately, if I'm talking about a value chain, then I'm talking about business models, because business models are the ones which point out clearly what is of value. So in the business model field, there are business model frameworks, theoretical frameworks that help to guide one to, as you're going out to pick out what is of value, there are theoretical frameworks. And I went there And I did select a framework. Specifically, it was called STOF. Yeah, STOF is STOF, and that stands for Service, Technology, Organization, Finance. So it was a framework developed specifically to map out the value chain of a mobile application, However, it was developed for mobile applications in an economic environment. For example, you could use STOF effectively to evaluate the mobile money application, yeah? Because it's from an economic background. But for me now, I was going into a healthcare background. So in other words, I was going to what we call, what is it called? I forget the name. This was a social, what do they call it? We have the economic side, then we have a development-oriented side, where the value we're seeking for is development, not economic value. So development, we're looking at, for example, we're looking at improved healthcare, improved access to affordable healthcare, things like that. So I wasn't looking for an economic side. So I had to come back to the social development side and reframe my theoretical framework. That was one. So that was one theory that I picked out, business models, but modified to suit a social development context. Then I also went to, because I was looking at social development, I had to come to the field of development studies. Yeah, I had to come to the field of development studies to guide my theoretical framework. Because I'm now coming in as an ICT 4D designer. For me, I am a designer, and I'm not a developer. Well, my first degree takes me there, but I'm not essentially, professionally, I'm not a development worker. So I said, as an ICT 4D designer, what theoretical framework can guide me to pick out what is of value? And for that, I went to development studies, from where I selected the livelihood framework. So the livelihood framework essentially picks out what is of value to a rural community, and not necessarily what is of value for me, the ICT 4D designer. What do I mean by this? As IT professionals, many times we design systems because we see value in it, but we don't necessarily consult the end user, the owner of the system. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. I remember the first time I experienced this was when I started working in the IT department of UMU, and we had a consultancy branch within the department who were developing websites. That was way back in 2004. And we developed a website for Mbarara University. And I remember when we went to present it to Mbarara University, the first thing they said, you have deliberately made this site ugly because we are competitors. Yeah? So you can imagine how heartbroken we felt, because we had put in effort to make something we thought was beautiful, but you can imagine what we felt like when they collected all these staff members of Mbarara University and they told us, you have deliberately made the website ugly. So, in other words, as I was coming in to do this research, my approach, I had also an ethical approach where I was saying, this thing shouldn't be about me, the designer. It should be about the community. You remember the first time I told you, the first time I brought the first version of the application to the hospital, the first thing they told me was, we don't have time for these systems. We don't have time to sit down and call patients. Do you know how busy we are as doctors? I remember also one doctor said that we doctors do not diagnose patients over the phone. We diagnose patients face to face. So in other words, I had to bring in the livelihood framework, which asks the end user, what do you want? Yeah. So by asking that question, I was essentially saying, let me start the value chain by asking the end user what is of value for them. So then I use the livelihood framework. So you see, I then combined these two to become my theoretical framework to guide me as I went to explore the context. Now, you too, all of you, when you're doing your research, you will use a theoretical framework to guide you to go out to whether it's the quantitative side or the qualitative side. Remember, the quantitative side, you're coming up with a hypothesis which comes from a theory. If you're going out to explore, let's say you're using a case study approach or design science or whatever it is, you have to use a theoretical framework that guides you to go out to explore. But now that is the key point. That is something that all of you must have. Now, grounded theory, on the other hand, is purely qualitative and does not start with any theory. So normally this one, a grounded theory, this is something that you find with philosophers. Yeah. So grounded theory is it's a method that may be used by philosophers, those who are starting from scratch on a way of thinking. Yeah. If any of I don't know if any of you has done any philosophy. When we did it for my first degree, we looked at people like Aristotle, Plato. You know, those who went out. I don't know, was it Aristotle who came up with the theory, with the thinking that we are all people in a cave. Imagine people in a cave, and the cave is dark, and it's only receiving a little light. Please proceed to counter number 8. Olivia, sorry. Now, imagine Aristotle gave an example of a cave, and this cave is receiving minimal light, and this light gives a reflection and on the wall, and all the people in that cave are facing that wall, and they are seeing a reflection. But what they're seeing is a reflection, not reality. But he said, out of those people in the cave, all of them will keep looking at the wall. But one person will venture out and say, let me go and look at the source of the light. And they come out of the cave and they see the reality that the others are only seeing a reflection. And that person will come back into the cave and tell them that, you know what, the reality is out there. Now, the people in the cave, some may say, no, I don't want that reality. I want this one that is on the wall. And some may agree and come out with them. Now, that is purely philosophical type of thinking. You see, Aristotle didn't use any theoretical framework. He simply pondered on something and he brought it out for others to see. And you see, Aristotle and Plato, these are people who have been used, their thinking and theories have been used by so many people. For example, in the Christian world, the theologians, a lot of theologians have used their theories, what they've developed, to come up to should I say, to build up on Christian theology and philosophy. So it's very rare that any of you will use grounded theory. It's highly qualitative. Yeah, but it is something, of course, to bring out forward to you. Especially for me, it was to raise out this theoretical part. You will not use grounded theory, but just to show you the difference between the two, grounded theory and the research that you will do. You will use a theoretical framework. It has to be part and parcel of your research. Have you understood what I'm trying to say here?
Yes, madam. Maybe my question was,
yes, please.
Is grounded theory in relationship to groundbreaking research? Because you talked about groundbreaking research earlier.
Yes, definitely. That is one of them. That is in relationship to groundbreaking research, which most of us may not do, but yes, Emmanuel.
So my other question would be, why don't they encourage students like at universities to venture? Because one thing I know is that some of these institutions actually use academia as, like, let's say someone is doing their master's or they are doing the maybe PhD, and then when they get, let's say, a source of funding, they will try to direct this funding to actually facilitate this master's or PhD student to come up with this kind of I think let me say groundbreaking research. So okay, I was in a research institute before I joined the NGO, and for some reason most of this work was actually spearheaded by the masters and PhD students. So
Yes.
every time we get funding, these are the people who would actually lead the field research, and this money is actually tagged to them as they spearhead this research to come up with all those reports and all that.
Okay.
So, but I rarely see this like in universities. Do they really just don't want students to do groundbreaking research, or they just feel they do not have the capacity?
Okay, Emmanuel, those I think that is a very good question. One of the things we first of all, if we look back to why we are doing research, most people will tell you. For example, when I asked most members to let me know what are their expectations, and majority were saying to do my dissertation at the end of the module. And that is usually one of the motivating factors. You've signed up to do a master's degree and you want to do it and finish it. Yeah. So especially because that this dissertation is the last thing that you do, the final thing that you do, usually your motivation and your supervisor's motivation is that you do something and you finish. That is the motivation. So normally we play it safe, should I say, Emmanuel? We play it safe because we want to finish. That is one. So the safe part is that you want to do research that build on somebody else's research, not necessarily doing groundbreaking research. Two, you also have to consider the fact that we are universities in Africa and in Uganda. Now I'll just give you an explanation or a description of what I saw in the Netherlands. The university where I was, which was TU Delft, Technology University of Delft. The Technology University of Delft has 1 semester of teaching. You have 1 academic year, and in the academic year, you have 2 semesters. So in those 2 semesters, what we see here in Uganda, we have semester 1, semester 2, and both semesters you have modules which are taught. Yes? Now, here's the difference in the Netherlands. You have 1 semester, you have 1 academic year, 2 semesters. 1 semester, you have taught classes. The second semester is purely for research, purely. When I was there, as a PhD student, I didn't attend, my PhD was not a taught PhD, so it was purely research. So the arrangement was you were given office space, actual office space, where you sat with, you would share with 1 or 2 other PhD students. So we'd sit in this office. Each one of you was given a computer, dedicated computer. This is yours. Any research software you needed, ICT would come and install it for you. In that office, for me, I was on a scholarship, so I received an allowance from the Dutch government. But the other PhD students that were there, and these students were from everywhere. There were people from different parts of Europe. There were people from China. I remember I shared an office with somebody from Indonesia. So they were from everywhere. So these PhD students, they came, they applied for the PhD, they were accepted. And as they sat in that office daily, they received a salary. Okay? They received a salary. So they were doing research purely, nothing else whatsoever. Now, this was very different from me, who would come back to Uganda, I'm teaching, I'm receiving a salary, because I have to justify why I'm receiving that salary. So the time I reach in Uganda, I have classes to teach, I'm supervising a student. Then of course you have family issues. If there's any family issue, you're catering to that, you're doing this, you're doing that. Whereas this PhD student comes, sits down, yes, they may have other issues, they are married, they're doing what, but they're not doing any work but research. Then they go to, when in the times when the semester is on, when there's teaching, that PhD student will go to that to a class and teach, and that PhD student will teach what they are researching, specifically what they don't teach anything outside of their research, pure. Now remember, they're given this space. They have their supervisor, they have a co-supervisor, and these supervisors have their students. And every week, every Monday, for example, for us, every Monday we met, the supervisors, the two professors, together with the PhD students. So you would present what work you're doing, and these people, you'd have circulated your chapter or paper, and they're given a week to read through, then they come and critique your work. Now, Emmanuel, you see, these are universities that are really focused on research. Let's come to Uganda. What are we focused on? Most of us are focused on, we need to pay school fees. We are building, we are paying rent, we need our salary, we need this, we need that, we need the other. Now, for instance, we've had a week before our lecture. If I asked each one of you how much time you gave, let's say, to the lecture we had previously, the things that we discussed, how many of you took the time maybe to go and look for some articles? Many of you would say, I had issues at work, I had maybe a sick child, I had this, I had that, I had the other. My workplace, I had a deadline to encounter, so on and so forth. Me, myself, the lecturer, I'm running a family business. I am teaching at the same time. Yes? So if you look at the university, even the university itself, we say at any university, the first objective is research, the second objective is community outreach, the third is teaching. Teaching should be the last. But in reality, in Africa, teaching is the first. Yeah? The one university that is trying to change that trend is Makerere University. You notice last year, Makerere University dropped certain courses. Makerere University is really trying to focus more on research. And reason being, Makerere University receives, should I say, 90% of research grants that come to Uganda. 90% go to Makerere University. How many of us receive grants? Other universities receive those grants. The reason why Technology University of Delft can go ahead and dedicate that much time on research is because they receive grants from governments, from their government, from the private sector, you name it, they receive the grants, and they can support, apart from a salary, they also receive money, extra money for more research they do. So the question is what is it that is motivating you to stick to research in its purest sense? So you will find a lecturer who may be focused more, or a supervisor who may be focused on getting most of his students to pass, and therefore he will say, I want all of you to develop systems, because that's the easiest thing. That's the easiest thing. Develop systems and just submit that and you will pass. And therefore you compromise on research, because this lecturer is trying to finish to have as many students as possible passed, because number one, it will ensure the students are passed. Number two, it will also ensure that he or she gets paid. Yeah, the more my student is not passed, it takes his time on research, the more I'm not paid for it. And my motivation may be money, that I have something on my account so that maybe I can pay school fees, I can pay rent, and so on and so forth. Emmanuel, does that answer your question on research and why we may not encourage more?
You clearly do, but so I guess that's why when when we have oppositions like trying to criticize the government, they talk about the entire education system being wrong and faulty. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe, okay, so here it doesn't matter what a university is supposed to do, as long as they are not facilitated to do those things, then it's not moving forward.
Yes. Because research needs to be heavily funded. That is the truth of the matter. It needs to be heavily funded. Senoga, do you have a question?
No, madam, let me just lower my hand. I had it earlier.
Okay, okay. Okay, let's move on. We move to ethnography. Now, ethnography, I don't know how many of you might have heard of it. Ethnography is a largely, purely qualitative research method. Purely qualitative research method. It's a research method that basically has basically been used predominantly by anthropologists. Yeah. Predominantly by anthropologists. These are people who are studying cultures and societies. So we had the example yesterday of female genital mutilation. So the researchers who have done have attempted a topic such as that have used ethnography. So ethnography, this is when a researcher makes a decision to go and live with a particular community to try and understand something, a certain cultural practice or a certain way of life. Yeah. So the purpose of that researcher living with them is to say that the reason for this is to say that the interpretation of the world, if we want to see the interpretation of this of a certain world, we live with the locals and we try to understand their reasons for doing something. There was a research, I think, there was a project done in Ghana. I think it was in a village in Ghana, and there were these donors who came to a community and realized women were walking long distances to go and fetch water. There was their source of water for this particular community. They were walking quite a distance. The women were walking quite a distance, and then the donor said, "No, these women are walking very far. Let us ease their burden. Let's put a borehole nearer to them." And they constructed this borehole and put it there. But then with time, they realized these women were not using the borehole. They were still going back to their old borehole. So they tried to find out why. They spent time with the community. So some of the researchers, some of the donors sent researchers who spent time with the community. And you really have to spend time, because the reason for spending time with the community is to gain their trust, so that they can open up to you. And so they spent time with this community, and they found out that these women, when they went out to fetch water, it wasn't just the act of fetching water that they were carrying out. When they went out, they spent time, they would start talking to each other. That was the time they would find out who slept last night hungry, who was beaten by the husband, who has a problem conceiving. So in other words, it was a therapeutic time for them when they took that long distance. Things they wouldn't have found out before, they would find out in that time when they walked that long distance. So you see now, a situation like this, only somebody who spent time with the community would find out that information. Now, you might say, for us in ICT and IS, when shall we ever use this kind of research? This research has been used, ethnography. Actually, I may try to look through some articles which I downloaded. That time when I was doing my research, there was an article I found where ethnography was used in IS. Why? What do I mean? Ethnography is trying to find out the culture, the interpretation of the world according to the locals. Now, is it true or false that corporate organizations also have cultures? Not so. There are certain things, cultural practices that may exist, for example, in a bank, that may not exist elsewhere. And certain banks will behave in a certain way. Whenever you change your job, especially in the corporate world, you will find that the new organization you've gone to has a completely different culture from where you came from. There are certain decisions that are made, and they are made because of a certain culture that exists somewhere. I remember there was a time, there was a gentleman who actually he's now the Vice Chancellor of Cavendish University. He's in the field of healthcare, but for him, I think his PhD really focused on human resource. And I remember one time he was giving a talk specifically on that, and he said that there are certain cultural practices that will exist in an organization that will differ in other places. He gave the example that, for example, Umu being a Catholic institution, there are certain days which are taken very, very important that elsewhere it doesn't matter at all. Even in another Catholic institution. Take an example, 18th October is extremely important to Umu. Why? Because 18th October was the day the Uganda Martyrs were canonized. So even in Umu, that day is taken as Umu Day. That day is very special. There is mass, there is a good lunch served at the main campus, and so on and so forth. And if you came from another different culture, you may find this very funny in the human resource perspective, but but you find that is really anthropology at its best. Now, I myself, when I was doing my research, I used ethnography as my research method. Why? Because I was trying to understand what is of value, what is of healthcare value to a community. And I remember I told you I spent 2 years with this community, sitting with them. I would go for workshops, sit with them. Most of the time I didn't understand what they were doing. Sometimes I would doze off even, but it took time. And as it took time, they also got to know me. They began to trust me. I became part of them. Even there are times when I didn't show up. They would ask me, "Hey, Madam Sheba, what happened? You didn't come." They began to open up and speak about things that otherwise they wouldn't have told me if I'd spent only
SHE.
Edson, could you please mute? Thank you. So that is ethnography. It's when you need to take time to observe, and you basically become a participant observer. You are with them and you experience life with them and you see it. One of the key points about this method is that it is very time consuming. Yeah, really time consuming. It's not a research where you say, I'm going to take a month. No, it probably takes 6 months or something like that. Spending time with the community, it's really time consuming to understand the perspective of the locals, should I say. So these locals can be anything. They could be part of a community, a rural community. They could be part of an organization. Anything, it could be anything, but you're really spending time with them. And what you're trying to understand is the culture that makes the participants make decisions according to the way they make them. Any question on ethnography? Do you have any question?
Maybe the understanding of anthropology.
Anthropology. So basically anthropology, you're looking at the culture of a specific community. If I was to just speak in layman's terms, what anthropology is, you're trying to understand the culture, the different perspectives of a certain human experience. So, for example, if you're trying to understand the experience of women who are carrying out female genital mutilation, what is the culture behind it?
Right, I think it's clear.
Yeah, you may try to understand, my researcher, an IS researcher may say, let me try to understand academics as users. What are the decisions that make, what is the culture behind an academic for them to make a decision to use a system or to use a certain device? What is it that guides them? You know, like, let me give you just to give you an idea that ICT is supposed to go hand in hand with research. Yeah, ICT predominantly goes hand in hand with research. So much so that universities and institutions of higher learning and education and research institutions have their own internet service provider. Are you aware of that? Are all of you aware that universities, universities use RENU as their provider, and RENU as an internet service provider cannot come and give internet services to a bank. It will not give internet services to any commercial entity. It only gives to institutions of higher learning, education institutions, and research institutions only. Why? Because research and ICT go hand in hand. The two go hand in hand. The two cannot be separated. They are needed. So you will find an old professor who is being urged to do research. He's doing research, but he's being urged to use ICT. So you'll find some dynamics there. There are dynamics that play. I gave you the example of Z-varsity, how academics totally rejected Z-varsity. And yet, when Moodle came in, academics picked it up wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. Why? Can you say academics are anti-ICT? What is the cultural play? What is the human experience there? Whereas you'll find the finance person will pick up Z-varsity easily, the administrator will pick it up, but the academic says no. Yet the same academic will pick up Moodle. The same academic will pick up Google Classroom. The same academic will pick up Zoom and use it wholeheartedly and will attend the trainings and participate fully, but will refuse to participate with Z-varsity. Why? So you see there are dynamics there that you may not just pick from a survey. Where something like ethnography may have to come in to explain certain things. Have you understood my point?
Loud and clear.
Okay. We have then action research. Now, action research, I'm sure most of you heard about this method when we did our first assignment. So action research is also quite largely qualitative in nature. It's qualitative in nature. But in this case, it requires the researcher to participate with should I say, the respondents and the researcher become stakeholders in a project. They become stakeholders. The researcher, there's active participation with the researcher and the participants, where you bring in something, a new process, a new procedure, whatever it is, you bring it into a context with participants. The participants are part and parcel of developing whatever it is that is being developed. You observe what is being done, and you report back from your observations. Now, the artifact that you're implementing in the context is not your research output. No, it's the observations that you see, how the participants are interacting with the artifact. That artifact may be a system, an application, it could be a new policy, it could be something developed using enterprise architecture. You see how the context is participating with it, and you report back. So the artifact you've produced is not your output, but it's the observations, how the context, the dynamics that emerge. Now, this research works hand in hand normally with case study. Yeah. So the research may be part of maybe part of an organization, which could be a school, a hospital, a university, so on and so forth. So in other words, action research goes hand in hand with case study. Action research goes hand in hand with case study research. So in other words, normally, if you're using the other one, you use the other as well. So you use the two as your two research methods. So in your report, when you're writing on your research method or your research methodology chapter, you'd be writing about those two methods because they go hand in hand. So you realize that this research is qualitative in nature. So I'll just give you an example, because my research was more or less like that. Mine was action design research. So you design something, you put it in a context, and then you observe the dynamics. So for example, for me, I designed the first version of the mHealth application, brought it into a hospital, and then dynamics began to be revealed. For example, the doctor has told me, first, we don't have time to sit down and make phone calls. We don't diagnose patients over the phone. Those were dynamics that were coming out. Then I went to the rural community, and they said, madam, for me, I don't know how to make a call, or I don't know how to send messages using a phone. You know, things like that. Another tells you, my eyesight is bad, I can't see. I can't. Those were dynamics that were coming out. Someone was saying, now we're spending a lot, we are using the phone a lot. That means charging the phone is going to be a problem. We're in the village, we use somebody to charge for us phones, and we pay money. So this is going to take up a lot of our money. Those were dynamics that were coming out. It wasn't the artifact that was the researchable output. It was the dynamics of the context. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Now, action research really involves, one of the key points to observe is that there is participation. There is active participation of the researcher and the stakeholders. Everyone is participating in the design of this thing and so on and so forth. Action research is normally found in the Faculty of Education. Faculty of Education really uses this a lot because their work, by nature of education, it is participatory. So action research is highly participatory. We come to design science. So sorry, these were demarcations I'd made previously and saved them I shouldn't have had them here. But on the what is uploaded on Moodle, it's not highlighted. Now, design science is purely is a research method for IS and ICT. It's a research method for IS and ICT. If you're going to design any artifact, this is the method that you should use. You should really use it. So it is focused on building innovative artifacts. So not innovative artifacts. When we are dealing with building systems, we are building innovations. That's not research. These are innovations we're coming up with. What we report back is what we experience during the design process. So design science basically begins with identification of identify the problem and you identify a problem and what is it that is motivating you to build the artifact. So I gave you the example of my research where I designed an mHealth application with the intention of improving healthcare access. Now, is this research? No. My objective, my primary objective was to observe the dynamics in rural healthcare. That was my primary objective. So that there was the physical problem of healthcare access, yeah? The physical problem of healthcare access. But there was the underlying problem of what are the dynamics that exist in rural healthcare. So far, do I make sense up to that point?
Madam, come again, please.
Okay. Let me use another example. Let us say, I think there was one of your colleagues. I remember who he was. He was working in Hoima. I forget his name, but I remember he said that let us say you see that there is a need for an ICT system for farmers in a particular area. Okay, let us say those farmers. What farmers can we give? What example can we give? What type of farmers?
Coffee farmers.
Let us say coffee farmers. Yeah. These coffee farmers need access to certain information. Can we identify which type of information? Is it in management? Is it in the marketing? Is it in management? What is it?
Information on planting materials also.
Pardon, which one?
On planting materials, on markets for coffee.
Yeah, all of that.
Processing.
They need all that information. Now, that is the physical problem that we see for farmers. The first question, what is the underlying research problem? What could be the underlying research problem? The first question I would ask is, have systems been built before? Are there systems that exist? It could be that there are systems which exist, which have been tried, but maybe were not sustainable. It could be we don't know of any system that gives that kind of information. Then we say, one can say, let us assume this is an exploratory research. Let us assume this is an exploratory research. We want to say that we have a group of farmers, they have stated that they have need for this information. And then we have an ICT4D designer or an IS designer who says, I'm going to design this system and see if this system, my objective at the end is not the system, but to answer the question, does the system answer the problem of the farmers? Does the system answer the problem of the farmers? Does it actually bring the information? Do they access this information? And does this does it provide for them the information they need? Then I say I'm going to use design science And then probably also use action research and case study. And I say, okay, I've identified the problem of need for information. Yeah, I've identified the problem, the need for information for these rural farmers. They say they're rural coffee farmers. So I identify the source of information, I design the system which becomes the platform, and the information is supposed to come through and these farmers access it. So I identify the problem, I define the objectives, and the objective of this designing this solution, I said the objective of designing the solution is to improve information access. So I design the solution, I demonstrate it, I evaluate. Now, essentially, as I'm doing all these things, I'm evaluating throughout the process. I mean, we say we evaluate at the end, but essentially we're evaluating throughout. What are we evaluating? Is this system providing access to these farmers? Let us say we design it, it is web-based or it is mobile-based, whatever it is. Does this system actually provide the information they need? Does it bridge the information gap? You carry out the evaluation. So as you carry out the evaluation, you may find in reality, yes, you've designed the system, but they don't have access to internet. Your farmers don't have access to internet. Or when they do gain access to it, it is too late. Maybe they don't have access to the mobile phones. They're not charging their mobile phones in time. Maybe the source of information is providing wrong information. Maybe they're providing wrong information. The source of the information is actually problematic. You evaluate. So in other words, the system, what you put outside, what you communicate at the end is not your system. It's on whether your system answers the problem and why it has failed to answer the problem. Take the example of the research article, the people who did the research article on action research and collaboration in the organization. They had an objective, but at the end, it didn't achieve the objective. What they communicated is why it didn't, why it failed. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So at the end of it, the design science, what you're communicating is if the objective has been achieved. So that evaluation you're carrying out, you carry it out actually from the very beginning as you're identifying your problem, as you begin to define your objectives. As you're doing all that, you're actually doing evaluation. But at the end, the final evaluation, it gives you the final output. I can share with you some, I think they're even on Moodle, but I can also share them with you. I have quite a number of articles on design science, which explain further, because I know this is a methodology some of you may want to use extensively. So I have some articles that explain this methodology in depth. So I'm going to upload them up on Moodle. Any question on design science before we move to action design science?
No, for now.
No, okay. Now, we have another method which is quite new in the field of IS and ICT, which is action design research. This method, definitely from the name, you can see it combines two methodologies, action research and design science. Now, the reason why they combined these two was the IS researchers, some IS researchers had a problem with design science. When you look at design science, the way it is designed it has a top-down approach. Yeah. What does that mean? An IS designer, an IS system designer comes in, sees a problem and designs a solution based on him or her, based on his or her thinking, designs a solution and places it there to solve a problem. Now, some people in the field, in the research, in the field of IS said, no, this is one of the reasons why IS systems normally fail, because there's a top-down approach. And normally you've not asked the people who are going to use the system what truly they want. So these people, these particular people, you see these researchers, I'll also share these articles with you, because this is also a research method that I used. Essentially what they were saying is no, systems should be developed from bottom down, should have a bottom-up approach. Essentially, it's the same thing as development studies. When I was telling you, I used the livelihood framework. In development studies, there are those who say a solution should come from the elites coming down to the poor. And then others who are saying, no, a solution should come from the poor themselves, because they know that the reality is theirs. They're the ones who experience the poverty, so they're the ones who should tell you what it is they need. Otherwise, whatever solution you're giving them will not work. They will not take it up. So the same thing that these people, the ones who developed action design research, also had the same thinking. They were saying a system any artifact should be developed from the bottom coming up. And action research gives that opportunity, because it allows you to participate with the stakeholders to tell you what they truly want. So the solution really emerges from the bottom. So for them, they changed the format. And again, I'll also share with you those articles that explain it further. You start with the stakeholders designing the solution. But as you design the solution, you also, let me see if, no, so I don't have the detailed, I cut out most of these things so that I wouldn't be too bulky. But I'll share those articles with you, and we can have even more discussions on them if you wish. After I've shared the articles with you, they're saying that start with the stakeholders. You define the problem. You define the solution together. You design the solution. You bring it in the context. They refine it. The context refines it. But throughout that time, you're observing the dynamics. Okay, you are observing the dynamics in the context, and the dynamics are what you report back, not the solution, not the artifact that you come out with in the end. Now, let me also say this also for IS and ICT students, the ICT students, it's also the same thing. The ICT students may also choose to design an artifact, a model, a framework, whatever it is you're doing, it also follows the very, very same thinking. Let me also even go beyond frameworks for ICT students. Have you ever thought to do research on ICT policies or ICT strategies? These are tools that are being told that we must use over and over again. Let me also give you a new buzzword that is being discussed, and so many organizations are now picking them up. Even government is. That is enterprise architecture. Yeah. We have had, I think there's an enterprise architecture being developed by NITA-U. The Ministry of Health is also now embarking on that, on developing an e-enterprise architecture for all of Uganda, and so on and so forth. It's a new thing that is being pushed forward over and over again. Have we ever thought to evaluate the unique context of Uganda? We talk about ICT policies in organizations, and every organization must have an ICT policy, 5-year ICT policy, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Have we ever thought to evaluate the unique dynamics that influence these policies, these ICT policies. Where we say, one of you in ICT may say, you may take advantage within your organization, you're implementing an ICT policy. And you say, objectively, I'm going to evaluate the context. As we design this policy and implement it, I look at the dynamics around the organization and study them and try to see what are the things that influence the success of these policies. What issues influence the success? What are the critical success factors for an ICT policy, let's say in a Ugandan bank, commercial bank? There are those which have maybe reported in Europe. What about Uganda? Because these are things we're just embracing now. These are things, these are ideas you could say, because the policy itself is an artifact. It's actually an artifact that is being implemented. The enterprise architecture, it's also an artifact. It's also being implemented. You could say we are going to design an enterprise, we're going to apply enterprise architecture for our organization. Your output is not the enterprise architecture, but to observe the dynamics within the organization. Am I making sense anywhere?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope it does. I'm going to share articles specifically for most of the methodologies. I'm talking about case study, ethnography, action research, action design research, design science. I'm going to share articles. I'm going to put them up on Moodle to help with understanding, to understand further. And if you wish, we can discuss them even more to see how these research methods work, because I know most of you are going to use them. Predominantly, these are the methods that we shall see in your dissertations. So, any question on research strategies?
Yeah, Dr. Shiba, maybe just a clarification. Are there some which are earmarked for MICT? Are there some which are earmarked for MIS?
Yeah.
Or you can use any across?
You can use, okay, predominantly if you're designing an artifact, which can be done by either one of them, either IS or ICT. A system is an artifact. A mobile application is an artifact. Yeah. A framework is an artifact. A model is an artifact. Implementing enterprise architecture somewhere, you're implementing an artifact. Formulating an ICT policy, that is an artifact. All of these are artifacts. So you can use either one of them. If your research is going to design any artifact, then for sure, you're either going to use design science or action design science. Yes, because you're designing an artifact. Again. Predominantly, when we're looking at systems, we're looking at them in their contexts. So majority will probably use case study, either a single case study or multiple case studies. But again, I would say the first thing we start with is your research question. Let us never lose focus on what your research question is. You may find one of you will use a survey. That possibility is there. So I wouldn't want to put any of you in a box Like one person said that for him is not a system development person. It is not an interest of his. So if he, I mean, I don't see the point of boxing that person into a context of developing systems. So what I would say is, if there are those who are going to develop a system, then look at design science, look at action design science research. Those are methods that you definitely use. And obvious, after that, you're most likely also going to use case study. Most likely you're going to use case study. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, I get it.
Okay. So the last thing we want to look at is time horizon. We have little time until 11, and I know my router will go off. So quickly, I want us to look at time horizon, because that is, or the timing, the time you're going to do your research is a key point. We have research that is cross-sectional. We have what we call cross-sectional studies, data that is collected only at one particular time. And most likely, most of your research is going to be cross-sectional. It is research that you're going to pick at a certain time. You may not explicitly state that my research is cross-sectional, but you may, if especially you're going to use a survey. If it's going to be a survey, you're going to say, my research is going to be from this time to this time. I'm collecting data from organizations within this time period. There's research which goes beyond, longitudinal studies, which picks research from different points in time. So, for example, you may want to look at use of ICT before the COVID-19 pandemic and use of ICT after. Now, that kind of data may be a bit difficult to pick, because what happened in 2019 may not be what is happening now. There are some organizations which take time to collect data over long periods of time. For example, I gave you the story of Palliative Care Association of Uganda, which collects periodic data. So there's data you may see about palliative healthcare, let's say from 2016, and that's different from what is happening now. It shows a different picture. From 2016 to now 2022, there's a different picture that lies there. Now, that kind of data, of course, is picked by such organizations which pick data over long periods of time. One of the things I really wanted to propose to NITAU was they should really focus on picking ICT data, national ICT data, so that ICT professionals can also use that data. Quantitative data, we use it as our secondary data. Like somebody can go to Uganda Bureau of Statistics and use their data, their raw data, for their research, and not necessarily go out and design a questionnaire. But NITAU can also do this for us, for the ICT professionals, where they make it a point to collect certain data for ICT data over time. Let's say ICT use in schools, internet consumption, the number of mobile applications now being developed in Uganda, homegrown. They should be able to collect that kind of information, and of what type. Where does it lean more? Is it in healthcare? Is it in gaming? Is it in, what is it? So that kind of data can help us in longitudinal studies as ICT professionals. We have, most of our research we have talked about, especially in qualitative data, is exploratory. Now, our research can either be exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory. At the bottom here, exploratory, this is when we're talking about qualitative research. Exploratory, moving to descriptive. This is largely qualitative data. So it only comes within a specific period of time. For example, my research was exploratory. That was in from 2010 to 2015 there, 2014, 2010, 2014, during that time period. That was really exploratory. So it was really for a certain specific time, cross-sectional, more or less, I would say. It was a snapshot of a certain time. So this was for a specific time. But when you move to exploratory analytical, then you can move to data that has been picked for a long period of time. For example, if you're picking data from Uganda Bureau of Statistics and so on and so forth. Now, you notice that these two, when you're in this category, you're really looking at case studies. You're really looking at ethnographic type of research, design science. Yes, yeah, even design science. But exploratory analytical, this is where you're coming now into surveys and experimental research. So depending on the type of research you're going for, is it exploratory or descriptive? Or is it explanatory? These hint at the kind of strategy that you're going to use. The kind of strategy that you will use, the kind of method that you will use. So exploratory research, this is you're saying you're finding out what is happening. You're seeking new insights. You're asking questions. You're assessing a phenomena in a new light. Yeah, assessing a phenomena in a new light, largely qualitative. So this is where you may use a case study approach. You may use ethnography. You may be using action research or action design research, or design science itself. 3 ways to conduct exploratory research. You start by a search of literature to find out what are those things that are relatively unknown. For instance, when I did my literature review, one of the things that was key for me, one of the things that I observed in the literature, most of the ICT4D researchers were saying that we're talking about the issue of sustainability. That ICT4D artifacts are designed and they don't survive beyond the life of the donor. Once the donor pulls out, the system, the application dies out. Then the other thing that literature was pointing out is that they were saying that the IS or ICT4D designers or IS designers knew, they understood the corporate or organizational context, that they could most ICT4D or ICT designers, any of you can design a system for an organization and most likely it will survive and continue and go on. Let me give you an example. IU, I remember, I don't know what the situation is now, but probably since 2009 or 2010 onwards, IU internally developed a student information system. So basically, I think this system is meant to store and display students' results. So they developed it internally, and it was developed over time. And from what I last heard, I don't know what the situation is now. It was highly successful, highly successful, and the university really took its time with it. Now I understand you tried also the same approach. I don't know what the situation is, how far that system has gone. UMO decided to outsource with Zivasti, and so also did government universities. So I think most government universities went for Zivasti. Then of course there were the political issues where there was some members of Zivasti pulled out and started their own company, and now that's Breakaway is starting its own and is now going back into the public universities. So the question of sustainability still lies there. For how long will this system remain? So in other words, what I'm saying is that clearly IS system designers have understood the organizational context, and they can comfortably develop systems which you see can survive for some good time. Yeah. But what literature was saying, that ICT 4D designers did not understand the developing context clearly, because they were trying to develop systems using their backgrounds from corporations or organizations, or rather, in other words, they were looking to theory, IS development theory, which were developed from an organization or corporate background. So, in other words, what literature was saying, there was a gap between ICT 4D designers and the developing context. And that gap needed to be closed in order to attain sustainability. So for me, when I started exploring, that's when I saw the gap, that there was a need for ICT 4D designers to understand the developing context. And that was what my research went out to do, to explore the developing context in relation to designing an ICT 4D artifact, or specifically an mHealth artifact. Yeah. So literature for me was my starting point, so to speak. Literature was my starting point. Others may decide to go and talk to experts. Yeah, talk to experts in the field. So take an example. Someone may say, I'm going to talk to agricultural farmers, specifically coffee farmers, as an IS expert. And I want to find out from them, what are their issues? Predominantly, what are their issues? Yeah. Then the other side, I may go to ICT 4D designers. Those are the people who have been there and done it, and they've experienced it. And these may be able to point out to you areas to explore. Conducting focus group discussions. So this could be with the experts or with the subjects who are experiencing something. Our easiest and most, what I'll point out for me is the easiest is literature, searching literature. The disadvantage with Africa is that most of the journals which have state-of-the-art literature, or what the most recent research that has been done, we may not have access to it, but talk to the librarians. The librarians know how to gain access to some of these articles that you may fail to gain access to. Some tips: be flexible. Be flexible and adaptable. Sometimes when we want to do research, we may be fixated on doing one thing, but open yourself up to what needs to be done. Be objective, what needs to be done. There is what you want to do, and there is what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is most likely the best area that will give you a researchable area. Any questions so far?
No question, but maybe if I may contribute.
Yes.
Okay, what you've just mentioned is true. Before, most universities would go for what is already developed, and for most of them, actually, those systems didn't work. And those universities that opted to do in-house development, it is really working because they were starting from the bottom up approach which they use, and most of them have registered the success.
Yes, yes. So it remains to be seen how these top-down approaches work. It's doubtful they will work, but anyway, that remains to be seen. So those are exploratory studies. So we have come to descriptive studies. So descriptive studies, your research may be both exploratory and descriptive. don't box yourself in, and it's just, it may be both exploratory and descriptive. One may go out to seek something to explore, but in the process, ends up describing something. But most of the time, descriptive studies are an extension of exploratory research. So the two normally go hand in hand. The two go normally hand in hand. What someone is seeking to do is to provide an accurate profile of an event, of a phenomena or a situation, an accurate profile, something that is unknown, something it may be known, but not a complete picture. So a complete picture is being given by your research. Explanatory, these are the largely quantitative research. So these are studies that seek to establish causal relationships. Yeah, causal relationships. So you have a hypothesis, and which is making an assumption that this will cause this, and your study is going out to establish, is this true? Is there an actual causal relationship between this and that? So for instance, one can decide to do that study on IS systems, but however, we don't yet have, I wouldn't say we have enough system implementations to determine whether a bottom-up approach works best in universities or in corporate institutions. I don't know if we do have enough sample size to determine if that is truly the case. But a person can attempt to do that kind of study. Then we have the multi-method approach, where we try to combine quantitative and qualitative. Or we try to say that our research is going to use both primary and secondary data. There are some people who say my research is only going to use primary data and nothing else. Do we know the difference between primary and secondary data?
I could try to just bring it out in my perspective. I think,
Yes.
to me, primary is the main source, main data source that you want to deal with. And probably secondary is just a supplementary of the sample size. For example, if you're dealing with probably adolescents, you might have an age group which is the primary core. Probably you are looking basically between 15 to 17, and probably because you might want to stretch and see how this works, you might add the 18 and 19, which becomes the secondary kind of sample space. That could be my understanding.
Okay. Robert, do you have any contribution?
Yes, please. My understanding also would be that primary is when you go to the source. For example, when you go, maybe you have your sample space or your area. You go interview people and get the information from the real people. Secondary, I may look at it as if I just looked at literature review, literature which is available without going to the source myself.
Yes, Robert, that's a very good explanation. So primary is that data we actually go and get from the respondents ourselves. Secondary is data that somebody else picked and you're using it. For example, from literature, there are some people who will use, there are these organizations that collect data and researchers come and use them. For example, I gave you Palliative Care Association. They have quite a lot of data. A researcher can say, let me go and use that data. Or Uganda Bureau of Statistics, the same thing, if you decide to use that information. So in other words, the secondary data, somebody else collected it and you're using it. Another organization entity collected it and you are using it. Now, you may find, let me just give an example. There are times when you collect data and it says, you go into the community and they say, you discover this, this, and this. And then in a certain literature, you back it up and say, this is also supported by this research where they went and did this and they've also found it. That is you using the secondary data. On combining qualitative and quantitative, I think we have spoken about this already, using the mixed method approach. Again, which method should we use? Again, one of the things I want to point out, it depends on your research objectives or research question. This is the key point. The first thing we must look at is your research question or research objective. What is it you're seeking to do? This will determine the selection of method that you use. Triangulation, I think I talked about this before. This is where you use different methods within one study to ensure that the data you're getting is accurate. Yeah. So where you may decide to use interviews, and you say, let me use a questionnaire just to make sure that what I observed in interviews and in workshops is really what is there. Here, is data from patient files secondary or primary? If I'm doing research on those participants. So we would say patient files. The question is, what was the primary purpose of collecting that data? Before, the doctor collected that information for purposes of treating and managing, of treating a patient and managing their sickness and so on and so forth. It wasn't their primary intention that it was made for research. Yeah. Whereas data collected, for example, let's say by Palliative Care Association, that monthly data, yes, number one, it's collected for reporting purposes, but it's also collected for research purposes. So another researcher who is not connected to PICAO can come and use that same information. Same thing goes with Uganda Bureau of Statistics. They collect their data for, number one, purposes of reporting, number two, for research. Then another researcher not connected to Uganda Bureau of Statistics will come and use it for research. Now, I'm not sure where this category falls, but I would assume that documents, you'd be using them for observation purposes. If you're looking at a patient's file for purposes of research, you'd be using them for purposes of, now for you using it for purposes of research, so it would be a primary source for you. Trina, I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have.
Okay. Now, it's already 11, I think, and my battery is about to run out for my router. So I'm thinking we better stop here. I would suggest, please look at, there are 2 pre-recorded videos on Moodle on research design. There's one for quantitative, there's one for qualitative. Please look at them. And I don't know if we can reschedule our Wednesday lecture. We have it. And we have a discussion on those 2 videos and look at research questions. Also look at what we call a good research question. Is that okay?
Yeah, Wednesday, I don't know what members say we can do morning hours.
No, I think morning hours are
Not
hard.
the morning hours.
Morning hours are very hard.
They are not
Wednesday,
only
can we
hard,
call
but
morning
impossible.
hours?
No, we can't do morning hours, guys. Come on.
Let's stick to 6 p.m. Morning hours is
We're looking for tuition during the time, so that's wonderful.
I think we could maintain at the same time, maybe 7 in the evening. We had agreed the other time.
Okay. So let's do Wednesday, 7 p.m.
Yes.
Okay, but Madam.
Yes, please.
Would you give us some time on seeing our research questions? Because some of us have developed some questions, what I'm saying, you do an evaluation for us, maybe to find out if we are having good research questions or we are already not having research questions.
Okay, so what we can do is have that lecture, then we have that as a discussion.
Okay.
Okay. There's also a comment here. Someone is saying we start at 8 p.m.
7.
7, Okay, so let's make
Can't do 8.
Okay.
I think David is new, but I think he'll get used.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone for taking the time for this lecture and listening. Let me just stop sharing.